Blog Talk Radio.
I want to welcome all of you to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are back in the Billy Meyer case, a never-ending learning process. Edward Albert Meyer is a one-armed farmer from Switzerland. He grew up in a region called Bulak, Switzerland, and his extraterrestrial contacts began when he was about 5 years old. He would get these telepathic messages from a man named Svath, who he was always also receiving mental images from. Svath was about 1,100 years old. Near the end of his life, he was from a race of people that call themselves the Pleiadians. The UFO community knows them as the Pleiadians. They are not from our Pleiades. They are from a different space-time configuration, some 80 light years beyond our Pleiades. The world they live on is called Ira. Ira is similar to the Earth in size and ecosystem. Its atmosphere has a much higher oxygen content, and the population is much smaller. And the people that live on Ira are at a much higher evolution than Earth humans. The people on the planet Ira, many of them are 5th and 4th stage human beings who have achieved levels of spirituality much higher than us. At the 4th stage, what they call real life, humans develop all sorts of incredible technologies and spiritual abilities. For example, at the 4th stage of human evolution, human beings start to create artificial intelligence which is organically based, and the central computer system of Semyase's beam ship is an organic artificial intelligence, which is sentient. It knows it exists. Semyase can have telepathic contact with her ship, so essentially it is a living being. There are also on Era people that are called Ishwish, or King of Wisdom. People in this stage have mastered many of the powers of the human spirit. They can do telepathy, telekinesis, levitation. They can look into the future. They can look into the past. They can also do teleportation. The human spirit is about the size of the end of a needle. It is invulnerable to harm. The universal consciousness creates human spirits to help it evolve to the next level. And human reincarnation is part of the evolutionary process of the universal consciousness. The human spirit is located deep within our brains, in the midbrain, in an area called Superior Colliculus. And the power of the human spirit travels all over the human body and energizes the whole human body, every cell in the human body. In fact, when the human spirit leaves the physical body, that energy is still in the human body for about 3 hours. And those 3 hours are typically, if they want to harvest organs, they want to do it then, because the residual energy of the human spirit is still throughout the body. The energy associated with the human spirit travels throughout the body like a lattice structure, going inside the human body and out. And so it brings life to every cell of the human body. The human spirit, it does not die, and it does not sleep even during our deepest sleep. It records all of our thoughts and all of our motions. And there must be an interaction between the brain and the human spirit, because Semyase said we can tell if our thinking is correct or not based on some kind of feedback that we get from the human spirit. Now, I have a clip here, a very short clip on the miracle of the human brain, which I found to be interesting.
Billions of brain cells are not done forging links with billions of other brain cells. Eventually, there will be trillions and trillions of connections between cells, charged with electrical pulses, rippling like lightning storms across the hills and valleys of the brain's deeply furrowed tissue. Every cell in its place, every link between cells carefully organized. Nothing random, nothing arbitrary.
What we would really love to understand is how the brain, during development, generates millions and millions of neurons, sends them to the right position in the brain, and then somehow instructs each of those individual nerve cells to form very, very specific connections with one another. You can think about development like a play that follows a script that is written down by the genetic code, but it has no director, it has no producer, and it has a bunch of actors that have never spoken their lines before. Despite all this, you pull the play off. To me, that's a miracle.
Now, deep within this human brain of ours, in this area called the Superior Colliculus, is this tiny needle point which is the human spirit. This tiny spirit energizes every cell in the body. And without this human spirit, there would be no life in the body. Now, Semjase, when she would, in 1975, she would land her ship there in Switzerland, on the rolling hills and valleys there in Hinterschmidruti. She would, in the beginning, she would step right out of her ship and walk over to Billy and have these very profound conversations about the human spirit and about the human being. And she quoted our terrestrial philosophers and said that everything in the universe is within the human, and that the human being is the microcosm within the macrocosm. So we have these repeating patterns in creation that appear in nature. For example, the electron rotating around the nucleus in our bodies, the molecules, the planets rotate around the stars. In our circulatory system, there's a branching structure that's much like the branching structure in trees. In a seashell, there's a spiral pattern much like the spiral arms in the galaxy. And there's also the repeating pattern of the human spirit, which is much like the creation itself. And Semjase said, the human spirit is the seat of the infinite, but few are aware of it. And that it takes sound logic and freedom from unreal teaching to wake up the power of the human spirit. Evidently, we're in some kind of sleep state almost at this level of evolution. So as we evolve, we slowly wake up the human spirit. When the human spirit is placed in the body, something comes down from the storage banks called the consciousness block. And within that consciousness block is all the wisdom of our predecessor personalities. And that wisdom is stored in the subconscious of the child. 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg, the human spirit comes into the body of the child. It animates every cell in the body. The consciousness block comes down. It places the wisdom of the predecessor personalities in the subconscious, and we get a new personality. Now that's the repeating pattern of reincarnation. And we also see the repeating pattern in nature of plants that die in the winter and are reborn in the spring. It's the same kind of repeating patterns that appear throughout nature. Svoth, Billy's first contact, taught Billy these kinds of things when he was a very, very young boy. And he told Billy about his previous lives here on the earth, because Billy's spirit form has gone through the process of life and death over and over again. And the first personality on the earth that we know of that this spirit form incarnated as was a prophet named, that we call Enoch, that they call Henoch. And Henoch was incarnated in 9308 BC, and he gave, in written form, a series of prophecies that are now coming to fruition in our time. And the irony of this is, it's so interesting in Contact 215 that Quetzal, one of the Plejaren, is telling Billy the manifestation of that same spirit that wrote the Henoch prophecies. He's telling Billy essentially what his human spirit had recorded for our time, what was recorded via a different personality. So I probably didn't explain that as well as I could have, but let's listen to what Billy has to say here about the Henoch prophecies. And the same time will most likely be the case in the future, when I receive permission from you in the coming time to spread the prophecies of Henoch for the third millennium. But nevertheless, I feel that Henoch's message for the future must be made known and distributed, because somehow it may bear fruit yet. And Quetzal says this. So I think we have reason to relax a little bit, because I don't think it's quite time for the Henoch prophecies to come to fruition. Quetzal says, the point in time at which these prophecies will begin to be fulfilled will be when a pope will no longer reside in Rome. All of Europe will then fall victim to a terrible punishment by evil powers. The Christian religion will collapse, and the churches and the monasteries will end up in ruins and ashes. Again, the spirit form of Edward Albert Meyer has incarnated as Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad, and the last of the seven, as they call it, as Edward Albert Meyer, a one-armed farmer from Switzerland. So Billy had his first extraterrestrial mentor in this man that we know as Thoth. He was not a Pleiadian, he was a Plejaren. During that main contact time, which was between 75 and 86, there were some 2,862 extraterrestrial humans on the Earth. They resided in 3 bases, one in Asia, one in North America, and one in Switzerland. The one in Switzerland had been here for 350 years. These extraterrestrial humans came from the Plejaren star system, the Tao universe, and from star systems that are relatively close to here. They all left in 1995. It's still kind of a mystery. We don't know why they left exactly. Thoth had his contacts with Billy for 11 years. And Billy got a second teacher who was a woman named Asket from the Tao universe. The Tao universe was created with our universe about 46 trillion years ago. These 2 parallel universes were created. Our universe is the material manifestation of the wisdom of the universal consciousness. Now, the universal consciousness is different than our idea of heaven. It's different from our idea of God. You see, the universal consciousness, it evolves. It's not perfect. The human spirit plays a role in its evolution. The human spirit was created to help the universal consciousness evolve to the next level. Now, I had quoted some yesterday from an interview that Billy did in 2011. It's a very good interview. It's on YouTube. And Billy was asked the question, is there a heaven? And he said, there is a heaven, meaning a sky, as we see it, But there is no ethereal heaven in that sense. If one talks about heaven, the human beings are usually seeing it from a religious angle, i.e. that somewhere an alleged dear God lives, or angels, and that this heaven does not exist, he says. He says this is an illusion. Heaven is based on religion. And angels are also the product of religious assumptions. There are no angels in the way the religions say. And in ancient times, the angels were simply called messengers. But then the religions came, the faithful people, and called them angels. But an angel, translated into German or any other language, means no other thing than just a messenger. And in ancient times, when certain extraterrestrials still came to the earth, they were called guardian messengers. Guardian and messenger at the same time. Guardian angels really don't exist. This is also an invention of the religions and the sects. Each guardian angel that exists is the human being himself. Through his thoughts, through his feelings, through his consciousness, he is his own guardian angel. That's why he decides through his reason and understanding, and if certain things occur, he will guard himself. When certain unconscious processes take place, which triggers feelings unconsciously, then the human being will protect himself. There is no such thing as an external guardian angel as the religions and the sects claims. Every human being has to be their own guardian angel, so to speak. Another interesting question from that same movie that Billy was asked is, can a human being have two spirit forms? And he said, no, this is impossible. Only one spirit form can be an individual being. Remember, we were saying earlier that deep within the mid part of the brain is that Superior Colliculus, and that region is the region that is involved with sight. And that's where the human spirit goes. It's just the size of a tiny needle point. Now, when people in the past seem like they've had 4, 5, 6, 20 personalities, this is merely a kind of schizophrenia, a problem with the psyche, a split of the personality. It's impossible that two spirit forms can simultaneously exist in a human being. It is possible only if there are Siamese twins. 2 heads, 2 bodies, or 3 heads, 3 bodies. Then you have a spirit form in each head. Each brain has its own spirit form. That's one of the creative natural laws. And everything else, which has come to us through our religions, through Catholicism and such, the exorcisms, the incantations, all this is nonsense. And Billy claims that spirits aren't evil anyway. There's no evil spirits. Each spirit is absolutely neutral. And no other spirit form can be in a human except his own. So there's no devil that can take a hold of you. And by the same way, there's no God in the religious sense that can take a hold of you. Remember, the universal consciousness, although it radiates love, it doesn't really personally love you the way our religions have taught us. Billy explains that the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation, and that creation radiates love, so that every moment and every place we can experience the radiating love of creation. Love is the highest principle in creation. And from that principle, everything follows in absolute logic. So every tiny plant, every tiny animal in creation fulfills its purpose in love. But there is nothing that comes from the creation that's evil. Evil is something that's learned by a human being. So the whole idea that someone would have to be exorcised is kind of silly. What we have is illness that comes to the psyche, illness like schizophrenia. The human being has his own consciousness, his own thoughts, his own feelings, and he lives and works with them. And what concerns the casting out of devils and exorcism, this is pure nonsense. Simply because there are no other spirit form in a human being except his own. Now, Billy has a very interesting definition of love that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. You know, we talk, I often talk about the radiating love of creation. Sensing the radiating love of creation is really a process that comes from the human spirit form. The human spirit form has something called the Gemut. The Gemut is that block or factor which controls the thoughts and feelings associated with the human spirit. And one of the processes of the human spirit is called Empfinden, which is that fine, sensitive feeling that will allow you to sense the radiating love of creation. Now, we human beings think of love as being a thought or a feeling, but what it really is the understanding that we are in a state of coexistence with everything in the creation. And Billy says, you can quote from what I have written, love is the absolute certainty that oneself co-lives and coexists in everything that exists, in the fauna and the flora and the fellow human being, in each and every material and spiritual life form of any kind, and in the existence of the entire universe and beyond. Therefore, love is not just thoughts and feelings, but true love is a spiritual, fine, sensitive feeling that originates from the Gemut, i.e. the spiritual realm. And what the human beings on earth are doing is that they build a form of thought and feeling-related love through their thoughts and feelings, which often is not permanent. They marry, they are together, then after a few weeks, months, years, everything falls apart, they divorce, they get into quarrels, they beat each other up, and under certain circumstances, there's even murder and manslaughter. A feeling-related love, love based on thoughts and feelings, is not what makes true love, which is of internally perceived origin, where things are transferred from the spirit realm in an internally perceived way into the consciousness and into the psyche. Well, let's take a short break for a couple minutes and listen to a little relaxing music. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We'll be back very shortly. of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. We're talking about the human spirit this evening. We're also talking about the Henoch Prophecies and the war in Ukraine and how it may possibly lead to World War III. Now, before we went on the short break there, I was talking about the Gemut, which is part of your spirit body. The Gemut controls your spirit-based thoughts and feelings. It's kind of our connection to the universal consciousness in some sense. The Gemut supplies the psyche with what they call the swinging waves in the German from the realm of electromagnetic life energy. The psyche receives these electromagnetic impulses. The psyche is what rules over your thoughts and feelings of the material-based consciousness. Now, your psyche can become mentally ill, your psyche is vulnerable, your human spirit is completely invulnerable. And this process of sending the electromagnetic waves over to the psyche, the book, The Psyche, that Billy wrote, refers to this as Empfinden, which is a purely spiritual process of the spiritual Gemut. The Gemut, which does not belong to the physical body. The Empfinden only receives these swinging waves, which are purely spiritual nature, and thus in the spiritual sense of neutral, positive, equalized form. The Empfinden are as manifold as the feelings, except that the Empfinden are simply pure and only of neutral, positive, equalized form. Remember, the universal consciousness is a neutral, positive entity. It doesn't become angry or jealous or bitter. It doesn't get involved in human wars. Now, one of the important aspects of the teaching of the Spirit is trying to recognize and look at your thinking and realize when your thinking is no longer neutral positive. Because when your thoughts become too positive, as in quote-unquote positive thinking, you can set yourself up for disappointment. It's not balanced. And when your thoughts are negative, well, that can lead to a kind of psychic illness. Well, we're coming into what's called the third millennium, which leads us back to our topic tonight. And Swath warned Billy that the third millennium started when the United States dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the third millennium would be a very difficult time, a transition period which would last some 800 years. And we're seeing some of the fulfillment of the Henoch Prophecies. In the past couple weeks, we've talked about these rolling walls of fire. For example, in Washington State, we've had the largest fire in the history of Washington State. It's called the Carlton Complex Fire. It's roughly 400 square miles, I believe, at this point, has burned, which is the same amount that burned in the Rim Fire of last year. And what they're seeing are these incredible rotating funnel clouds of fire where these swirling firestorms, the wind can get up to hundreds of miles an hour. And that's part of the specific prophecies which have been talked about in the Henoch Prophecy. Let me talk a little bit about the Ukraine, and then I'm going to play some more clips on what's going on over there. The Ukrainian Revolution occurred on February 2014. It took place after a series of violent events in the capital of Kiev. They ultimately ousted the president of Ukraine, which was a guy named Viktor Yanukovych. And This was immediately followed by a series of changes in quick succession in the Ukraine socio-political system. What was installed was a new interim government, and they restored an older version of their constitution, and there was impromptu presidential elections. Now, people that really research these kind of things, people like Alex Jones, are saying that the Ukrainian government was intentionally overthrown by the West. I couldn't tell you one way or another. Alex, for example, is one of the people that is saying that the Ukraine is being gobbled up by the New World Order and the globalists. The Russians now are shooting down the Ukrainian helicopters. The Russians are sitting there with these missiles waiting to shoot down these Ukrainian helicopters. Russia hasn't recognized this interim government, and they call it really a coup d'etat, which they say has occurred. I'm going to play a clip where an RT journalist was shot on the streets of a city in Ukraine. So let's listen to this.
Violence has once again hit the city of Mariupol in southeastern Ukraine. Video from the mayhem purportedly shows the army shooting into unarmed crowds of people celebrating Victory Day. RT's Irina Galushko is in Odessa and brings us the developments from the region.
If you look at the footage that we have already seen throughout the day, it's clear that there have been some civilians on the streets of the city. It is a Victory Day commemoration, not just in that city, but in a lot of places in southeastern Ukraine. Obviously, there have been some families out with children. We also have a report from an eyewitness describing the events as they have been unfolding in Mariupol.
I saw tanks and armored vehicles in Mariupol's main street, and they were heading towards the city council building. A lot of people were gathered there. There were also some people approaching the local interior minister building, and it looks like Ukraine's forces are shooting at the legs of those who are trying to come close to it.
Now that the building of the interior ministry has been set on fire, reportedly from the tank shells being fired at it. At the time of those reports, there also has been information that people could be inside that building. A cameraman working for roughly RT's video agency has been shot through the stomach and wounded. Now, doctors say his life is out of danger at the moment, and he is expected to make a full recovery. However, listen to what this man describes has happened to the cameraman. The man has asked that we keep his identity unknown at this point.
Your correspondent was showing the armed people en masse that he was unarmed, trying to convince them that he was a journalist, that he was a member of the press. Then he suddenly decided to run across the street where we're on. A shot was heard and he fell down.
Exactly why the Ukrainian military has decided to carry out an offensive on the Victory Day, knowing full well that people are going to be on the street, and we're talking about civilians, women and children, is not yet clear.
That was RT's Irina Galushko.
This next clip is from heavy fighting and firefights in eastern Ukraine. And the clip starts out with heavy night fighting, and you see tracers going through the night sky, and there are these red and yellow streaks of light. In this scene, the military are transporting across the road in this next clip. And eventually will come up on compounds that are burning after they've been attacked. And you'll hear fire crackling in the background. and you'll eventually hear some soldiers yelling at people in cars and firing shots. At some point here, soldiers will be engaged in house-to-house fight. So these are the sounds of war. I think it's very important for us to really get a feel for what this is really like. So let's listen a little bit. You can hear the sounds of birds in the background, some gunshots in the distance. Sounds of people yelling in the streets. It's very interesting watching some of these clips, watching the jets fly over people's homes and the bombs being... That was some heavy machine gun fire we just heard there. Now the Henoch prophecies, let me read here, because there's supposed to be 2 civil wars eventually in the U.S. if we don't change our ways. It says the misery on earth will continue as 2 terrible civil wars will break out in America, whereby one will follow the other. Afterwards, the United States of America will break apart and deadly hostility will prevail among her, which then leads to the division into 5 different territories. So the U.S. will be broken up into these 5 different territories. And somehow sectarian fanatics will play some kind of dictatorial role in this. But this anarchy is a worldwide condition that will prevail and torment human beings over a long period of time. Human beings will be tormented by many epidemics and diseases during this time. And some of these diseases will be new and unknown. So I want to also play, I have another interesting clip here. Some Ukrainian fighter jets flying over. This is very interesting, I think, as well. Imagine sitting on your porch and listening to that. Well, that's not so far from reality, because right now in Ferguson, Missouri, I guess, we're seeing these anti-police brutality riots, and there have been looting. Cops have arrested people. Evidently, a boy was shot who had his hands up by some cops, evidently, and this has caused like 4 or 5 days of rioting in Missouri. So let's listen let's contrast the sounds we just heard of open warfare now with the rioting that's taking place in the United States.
And today would have been the first day of college for 18-year-old Michael Brown. Instead, hundreds are taking to the streets to demand justice for him after Brown was shot to death by police in Ferguson, a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. The unarmed teen was reportedly just jaywalking across the street when police attempted to pull him over for the infraction. Police say he made a move for their firearm while his friends he was walking with tell a completely different story, saying his arms were raised and he was complying with police commands. Now, hours following his death, many people took to the streets in what started out as a peaceful gathering that later resulted in a riot situation where 300 police officers were deployed and at least 32 people were arrested, with 2 officers injured. St. Louis County Police are investigating the case. The FBI is also launching its own parallel investigation to see if any of his civil rights were violated. Now, earlier, I spoke with Ms. Mary Ratliff. She's the Missouri State Conference president at the NAACP. I first asked her what she thought this latest incident of lethal force by police on another young black male represents in race relations today.
I think that this is a very unfortunate incident here in St. Louis, and we are seeing far too much of these incidents occur. We and then the ACP are endeavoring to take legal action, community actions, and to make sure that justice comes to this young man who obviously it appears was shot down without cause. We are endeavoring to meet with, we are meeting now with Mr. Crump, the attorney for the family. Our president.
Anyway, this teenager was killed by police for one reason or another. We still don't know why he was killed. And the cops in Missouri are going so far as now that they're arresting journalists.
Looking at pictures there from moments ago out on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, that's outside St. Louis. Heavily armed and armored riot police confronting sit-down strikers protesting the killing of a young African-American man, Michael Brown, by one of their brother officers. And there's breaking news out of that protest involving the people covering it and police. 2 reporters were arrested tonight under what sounds like some strange circumstances. Our senior media correspondent, Brian Stelter, has been working his sources. He's joining us now with some late information. These 2 reporters, Brian, first of all, what do we know about them? What do we know what happened?
Well, they're 2 of the most prominent journalists who have been on the scene in Ferguson, Wesley Lowery of the Washington Post and Ryan Riley of the Huffington Post. I've been following them on Twitter because they've been among the most active reporters on the scene, posting pictures and stories and quotes from people there who were protesting. At about 8 p.m. Eastern Time, police came into the McDonald's where both of them were working, filing their stories, charging their batteries, that sort of thing. And these police officers told them to leave and then arrested them. They went silent online for about 45 minutes, which concerned their bosses at the Washington Post and Huffington Post, and obviously concerned a lot of their fans and followers on Twitter. But they have resurfaced. They say they were both released without any charges, without even any paperwork. They say they were roughed up, but they're okay. But, Wolf, this is a pretty serious escalation in tensions, not between the community there, which we've seen for days now, between the community and police, but between journalists and the police. There have been a couple other cases of journalists being told to leave this.
So what does the Meyer material say about this? Well, in the book called The Goblet of Truth, it warns of the dangers of the third millennium, and it says that our leaders will become megalomaniacal in the third millennium, and they will take away our rights of self-determination. And it explains it this way. It says, your greed for profit, you human beings of earth, is continuing to abound more and more, and those of your world who have might are casting your populations of all states into ever deeper misery, making imperious and megalomaniacal decisions over your heads and taking all the might of determination away from you as a people. One of the things we've seen is the National Defense Authorization Act, which basically takes all of our due process rights away. They can put us in prison indefinitely without any charge for no real reason. And this is part of the dangers of the third millennium, which the Meyer material has been warning about for many, many years now. And in fact, the Ferguson, Missouri police are actually preparing for war with their citizens.
I'm Joe Biggs with Infowars.com in Ferguson, Missouri. Right now, the riot police are standing beside us, right behind us. They have this entire bridge, this road blocked off.
You are the parking lot. This is the St. Louis County Police Department. Disperse now, or you will be arrested. You are the parking lot. This is the St. Louis County Police Department. Disperse now, or you will be arrested.
As you can see, tensions are high here in Ferguson because of what happened. The people are tired. People all over America are tired how cops kill and beat innocent people for no reason. This is what we have to look forward to all over the place. Look how quick, within a matter of days, they were able to go into a martial law status here in Ferguson.
I'm with her. I'm putting my life on the line for my people. I'm putting my life around for everybody in this country. I believe in equality.
We have a right to assemble.
And why the cops tell us we can't be out here? Like you said, we have a right to assemble.
Martial law.
Our rights are being
the one
authority
of
of police every day. They have complete domain over us. They are like God. If they tell you not to do something, you cannot do it. And if you do, they will treat you like a dog. You will be shot down. Well, at least for a black man. I'm not sure for everybody, but I do understand that.
So the Meyer material has warned us that monstrous forces will be created by science and will be released by the military forces and armies as well as by terrorists, causing great destruction. Millions and even billions of people will be killed by acts of terrorism, by wars and civil wars, and finally, in some parts of the world, every third human being, and in other places, every fourth human being will lose his or her life. Nations of the East will rise against the nations of the West against the East. Many deaths will be inflicted on the people by fighter and bomber aircraft, and bombs and rockets will destroy and annihilate smaller and larger villages and cities. Now, these are still prophecies. They don't have to get this bad. In fact, one of the prophecies says that the greatest disaster in recorded history will occur in North America as nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons will be released by automated systems which will run outside of human control. Now, we still have the opportunity to stop these things from happening. We don't have to engage in these wars, because if this warfare is released on the earth, the Meyer material explains that the people will become completely powerless against all this, and they will live through 888 days of hell on earth, suffering hunger and plagues, which will claim even more lives than the war itself. And this time will be severe as never before experienced on earth. So let's not take part in these wars. Let's instead turn to these spiritual teachings, understand that we're connected with all things. Spock told Billy that everything in the universe is one, and it's all bound together. And there's also that great paragraph in the Goblet of Truth, which is entitled What the Truth Knows to Say, which goes on to say, rivers, lakes, streams, stones, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form that's on a journey through time. And many of these spirit forms are connected by psychic vibrations. And they're on a journey through time which involves many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth into the world of pure spirit. And if you go into the forest and you listen, you can hear these creatures as they communicate with one another. Listen to the birds, which I like to say sing because they can sense the radiating love of creation. I'm not so sure that that's true, but it's just kind of my take on it. The insects, the cicadas, the crickets, the frogs, the peepers, all of these creatures are part of an indissoluble web of life. And no creature that's being guided by the universal consciousness seeks to raise itself up above those of its own kind. And if we rediscover our connection to all things, then we relearn what real love is the understanding of our connection to all things. And real love is a wisdom-conditioned love. It's a permanent thing. It's not unstable like emotion-based love. So anyway, we're about running out of airtime tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I've sure enjoyed bringing this information to you. We'll be back on later in the week. I think I'll have a little more time this week. We can dive back into what's happening in the Missouri riots and what's happening in the Ukraine, and hopefully we'll become more reasonable and this stuff won't get out of control, and it'll all work out for us here. Thanks for listening.